Kristen already said a lot about us. But yeah, we're going to do a round of introductions again so we can get your names too. So this is actually a dialogue and not just us talking for the next hour.
Yeah, I'm Chelsea. I'm a therapist student, which you're going to learn more about in a little bit. My focus is in education, specifically looking at power structures within education and how that forms and shapes youth identity development. So that includes all of us here. Yeah.
And my name is Ethan Gleemaker, and I am studying critical multicultural education in the context of identity as my full title. So pretty similar to what y'all are doing right now with children's literature, but mostly just literature in general. I'm going to be a high school English teacher. So it's incredibly relevant to my career field in the future. And we wanted to introduce a concept to you called preferred pronouns, and that's something that we do in a lot of our classes, and every time we do any sort of facilitation, we make sure to address preferred pronouns. And what that means is what you like to be called when you're not referred to as your name. So if someone was talking about me, and they'd already said, Ethan likes to do these things, he really enjoys running, then they would use the he, him, his pronouns for me, because those are the pronouns that I prefer. I prefer to be labeled as he, him, or his. For Chelsea,
I prefer she, her, and bringing this up because we're going to go over a lot of different gender preferences, and there's a lot of terminology, but we also want to make sure that this space, as we're talking about and kind of theorizing about these things, we're also being inclusive to everyone in the room, and making this a space that is both a learning space and a liberatory space. So we're going to start with your pronouns. And it'd be great if we could hear your name again, just because we just met you, and your pronouns. And we'll go around. So I'm Chelsea, and she, her.
Ethan, he, him, or his.
I'm Elaine, she, her, hers.
Is that Kristen? She, her.
Raven, she, her.
McKenna, she, her. Abby, she, her. Miley, she, her. Kathleen, she, her.
Krista, she, her.
Lynn, she, her. Sarah, she, her.
Great. And what was your name again one more time?
Krista, sorry.
Kristen. Okay, no worries. So that's a wonderful exercise. So now we know when we're referring to folks, not by their names, what pronoun you prefer. And there are some folks too who don't identify with a particular gender and they prefer they, them, their pronouns or z, their pronouns. And that's something that we may talk about a little bit later. But just be aware that there are multiple different ways you can identify yourself. So it's always important to ask someone before you assume what gender they identify with.
And we only have an hour with you, sadly. We spent all day talking about this stuff. So the scope of our project, or our time together, is going to be a little bit limited. We want to cover both kind of terminologies around queer studies and queer theory, and then also specifically get into the nitty-gritty of children's literature and queer children's literature. So if we zoom through, it's just because we have a short amount of time and a lot of cool stuff to cover. But absolutely, like, make a sign, put it as a hand, or just like, hey, wait, if you have a question, because we really want this to be, this is for you, and for us, this is for you. So,
feel free to ask us to slow down too. I have a tendency to speak really quickly when I get excited or if I'm trying to rapidly go through information. So we're going to start out, obviously the title, not obviously, the title of the presentation is Queer in Children's Literature, as you are in a critical multicultural analysis class. And we wanted to start with going over some of the outcomes that we have for today, and we recognize, like Chelsea said, that we do just have a very limited amount of time, so I'm going to kind of breeze through these. But the first one is we really want y'all to be able to identify and understand some key terms, and we'll go over those, to understand the expansiveness of the genre of queer literature, and also to identify some of the holes that exist. To engage in critical analysis of a work using tools you already have that you've learned in this class or that you brought to this class from your prior experiences, and also some newly acquired tools that you may learn about today. To have a fun, productive, and a safe, I put a box around that, dialogue regarding queer representations in literature. And what safe means is we really wanted to make sure this was a safe space for everyone. Everyone feels comfortable to share from their own personal experiences. In order to do that, we have to be incredibly trusting of one another. And I don't know if you've gone over the rules of previous conversations at all. So you know a little bit about what it means to establish a safe space. So we're hoping that we can all enter into that today and be comfortable with one another. And then finally, to incorporate today's information into a holistic understanding of multicultural children's lit, and recognize that queer children's literature isn't its own sort of silo, that it interacts with tons of other literatures, and that those themes are also present in different types of children's literature. So it's not just one silo that we're going to be talking about, but there are multiple themes within queer children's literature.
So have you all gone through any sort of like class norms or anything like that?
We've done the
Just
courageous
curious.
conversations
Okay.
for our course.
As guests of the classroom, we wanted to make sure we're on the same page with how you like to learn and what you're known for. Are there any additional ideas, or specific things that you all want to learn about today? Are those outcomes like pretty? I know those quick, but those outcomes sound pretty good. Like what you want to learn about? Kristen's like, yes, let's do it. Okay, so we'll actually do it then. So actually, so we're going to do a little straw poll first, and I'm just curious if you could raise your hand if you've ever been read a children's book, or if you've read a children's book to someone else. So, and keep your hand up if that book had a theme of love, or just any kind of love was part of the theme of the book. What about romantic love? Is romantic love in the book, or story? How about queer or gay, broadly defined romantic love? Right on. So we got a couple, but at that point, a lot of hands went down. So just to kind of get an idea of where we are in this moment in time, if you'd asked 10 years ago, or maybe 30 years in the future, maybe the hands would be a little different. So and so we just wanted to start, since this whole week is kind of about children's literature, to kind of think about broadly defined why is children's literature important, and what function does it serve in this society, and why does that matter? So if you want to, you can think about your own personal experience with children's books, or just kind of more theoretical, but what function does children's books serve, and why is that important? If you want to turn to the person next to you and just talk for a couple minutes, we're going to start there.
And we know they're just 72, so we're hoping that Sierra and Danita will kind of join for folks who want to partner.
Yeah, I think it also gives them learning experience. They can tell us around and just since we're category, especially in math, all stories and I can understand
Yeah, you can just kind of choose. It's like based on
I don't think it's exceptional.
That's true. So, I don't know, I guess just the
There's rice in here, so it's good to know.
That's good.
I can't remember which one is it. There's rice. That's looking like a rice patty. That's what I
But it's not, okay.
I would say like first throwing these out there.
I haven't had coffee today, so this is going to have to do with, I'm surprised that I am, no, I know, this is like a first for me, so I figure I've got to drink something with caffeine or I'm going to start getting one of those killer headaches.
Okay. Sounds like most conversations wrapped up. Good. Does anyone want to share back some of the things that came up in your pairs? Daniela's offering up this over here.
I was like, yes.
We had a pretty good discussion. I like what she said, imagination. I mean, that was something that I really like thinking about. Yeah, I really felt like as a kid, it really like the adventure and everything gave me a sense of like confidence or things like, especially like gave me hope. Like It's gonna be happy, okay. I guess something to look forward to, or, well, I mean, because like personally, you don't really understand, like, these great films aren't always, even though they're about the same in the movies, but it's nice to have that hope that you can make that for yourself.
Yeah. So you're kind of imagining yourself in this story.
Yeah.
And that gives you something like exciting to imagine. Absolutely. Imagination. Cool. Anything else? These two groups over here.
It was like a good way to get kids involved in like wanting to learn because they like want to know what the pages say and like what the pictures mean and get them involved. So it's not just like the parents like, oh, we're gonna read. Like the kids want to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it's also at a really early age, it's important for the like parent and child interaction that way because then that's I don't know, something they can be together, I guess.
Yeah, and it's like you're sharing a story, so that it's not like the power between like when you're reading a story is it's very much a co-created thing. You're both imagining and you're both experiencing the story together. Any other last ideas? Well, we had some ideas too, so we wrote them down. And these ideas are not just solely ours, but the work of Peter Applebaum and lots of other folks. But we really thought storybooks and children's books were important because they help create popular culture. They provide a model of what the world, how the world works and how people interact with the world in a lot of different situations that oftentimes are very familiar to children. And popular culture is important because it helps shape and create what we consider reality and how we know how to interact in the world. So how we know how to interact when we go to school, when we go to the store, when we go to the baseball game, whatever it might be. And it helps us make meanings in our life. And so this is what Applebaum calls the habit of mind and body. And that's kind of thinking about how do you know how to act when you walk into a classroom? How do you know how to act when you meet your friend on the street? It's a different interaction than maybe if you met your professor on the street. Maybe not. So storybooks at a very young age, and we're learning this since, as soon as we're born, we're kind of learning about the world around us. Babies are very inquisitive. And so as very young children, we're also learning, and one of the ways we learn is through the stories that are represented for us in our storybooks. And but this is not to say that storybooks kind of create the world and then we march through it. Storybooks and we kind of co-create it. So there's a back and forth between what goes in the storybooks and then what comes back to us. And so there's a dialogue going on between them. And Peter Applebaum, who's a curriculum theorist among other things, talks about reading children's books for ourselves, for yourself, not for the potential they hold for others. And I really appreciate that kind of way of thinking about storybooks is not just something to be considered for children, but to really consider how we are, since storybooks are written mostly by adults, how we are writing down what childhood is supposed to be like. What stories do we want to tell our children? And in that way, we're constructing what we think childhood, as we imagine it, should look like. And so we're kind of making the case that children's books are also for adults and as they are for children.
We also want to do some thinking too about who are the people behind the pens who are writing these stories. So when we did the smaller activity at the beginning, where Chelsea asked who has read children's books or who had read them before, and the hands slowly went down and we came to themes of queer romantic love. I doubt that the ones that don't have any representations of queer romantic love were written by queer folks. So it's good to just think about who's the author behind the books and who are the people creating this culture.
And if we look at storybooks from the 1800s versus storybooks from now, we kind of get from different geographical locations, we kind of get snapshots of who is writing at what point and what are the stories that we're telling our children at different points in time and different locations. So it's kind of almost like archaeology in that way.
So how many of you have seen this before? This is actually, Chelsea and I just discovered, this is version 2.0. We have done a lot of our learning with the first version. And this sheet, this document was created by folks called, it's pronounced Metrosexual, and it's just an online organization. and we wanted to go over some key terms here. We have a section, or we have written in our schedule a section for key terms later, and we decided to cut that because of time limitations. But we'll give you some basic terminology that you can use right now in the discussion. And if you'll notice, let's first look at the genderbread person that we've got right here. And there's a couple of different areas we want to look at. So one is identity, and we've got over here gender identity. So this is how you think about the way your identity is performed or expressed, which can be very different because the expression is here, which is your whole body. So I may, oh no, did I do that?
It's smart, yeah.
Oh, it's smart.
Oh man. So my gender identity could very well vary from my sex, my biological sex. So I may have been born with male parts, but I identify and express as what I would term, or what society would term as a female. So if I choose to wear dresses every day and I choose to paint my fingernails, society has sort of labeled those female things. But for me, that's normal because that's how I feel and that's how I want to express myself, and I may call that a female gender expression. So we wanted to recognize that these can all be the same and they can line up, they can be very different. And this version 2.0 allows you to sort of map, what do they say, plot, if you all are familiar with that math term. You can plot your identity on these arrows here. So with gender identity, there's, at this point, is non-gendered. So for my personal gender identity, I identify as a male or as a man. So my plot would be right here, 0 on the non-gendered on the womanness scale, and it would be towards over here on the manness scale. I wouldn't put myself at the very end because I don't identify as hyper-masculine at all. So maybe somewhere 3/4 are in the middle. And then it's the same for the other one. So with gender expression, I tend to express more masculine, or how society would see masculinity. So I would be toward this part on the feminine, probably not all the way over to agender, which means without a gender expression. Somewhere 1/4 of the way, and then somewhere again over here. With biological sex, this is, I think, deals with the parts that you're born with, so biology. So folks who are born without male or female parts would be on this side of it. So for myself, since I was born with fully just male parts, I would be 0 on the femaleness scale and all the way to the end on the maleness scale. But there are folks who are very different.
Also has to do with like hormones and different like chromosomes. So there's a lot of different nuances in our biology that it's not just like binary, like 1-0 kind of deal. So that,
and it can also change. Too, is it can be very fluid. So maybe one person was born one way but doesn't feel that way at all because of hormones or because of just the way that they feel and interact with the world, and you can change that through a variety of means. So recognizing that all of these spectrums or plot points are fluid, and that they're never really going to be stationary. You can change from day to day. So does everyone sort of get the premise of how these work? How you plot map your identity in terms of these 4 different categories? Perfect. And we also want to recognize there are some things missing, and this is why it's version 2.0. There was an original 1.0, and the company received some feedback, and they created this version 2.0. But there's always going to be things that we notice about them that are different. Mm-hmm. Some terms that we wanted to touch on really quickly were pansexual. Does anyone know what pansexual means?
Anybody guess?
Yeah.
We're totally into guessing. Like, this is not like we're gonna write it down.
Nobody wants to guess?
Doesn't it mean like you don't care what kind of parts the person has?
That's how I would define it. A lot of times people use the term bisexual, and I've met a lot of trans friends that I have are sort of offended by that term because it's, where do I fit in? If you're only attracted to males or females, like there's that binary in gender again. So pansexual is a way to say you don't really care, what the person looks like or how they identify or what their parts are. That's great. It's Raven, right? Yeah. Thank you. A sheet here.
And so we wanted to bring this up to kind of give some context for just like how varied and how broad both gender expression and sexuality, which are two kind of separate but often overlapping things, can be, and that there isn't like either you're a straight person or you're a gay person, and that's kind of it. Even though oftentimes like on sitcoms and things like that, that's kind of the like cutout of the person that you get is either there's like the straight person or the gay person. So there's a lot of variability in how you express yourself and how you express love, and so we just wanted to bring into the equation as we think about the stories that we tell about queer children in queer children's literature, just how many ways there are to be in the world, and that they can change, and that's fluid.
And again, we just want to reiterate too that there's so much to this, and we could spend an entire hour just talking about this. But because we're limited on time, we're going to move on. But if you have any questions about any of these terms or any of these ideas of how they work with the concepts, like feel free to talk to either Chelsea or I afterwards, or do your own research. There's tons and tons of research available on gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, affectional orientation, and those sorts of things. So we apologize that we're speeding through it because there is so much more, but feel free to ask us questions if you need to. Or right now.
Yeah, are there any questions now?
This is available online, right? Or we can have, could we have your PowerPoint or your references?
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely. And this person also does a lot of phenomenal articles. They created this image just to kind of help all the visual learners in the room. I'm one of those. But they also have a lot of articles online that kind of go into more detail of these things, since it's definitely just like a snapshot of queer theory. And yeah, how's everyone feeling? Are we good to move on? Questions? Like, is anyone like, this is so exciting! Wow, I would have never thought. You two are so sweet. Okay, great. So these are some of the terms. We were going to do an activity roundup, but we are sadly low on time that we wanted to run through that we have found come up a lot in our research and are helpful when you're talking about queerness at all, but queer children's literature as well. So we're going to skip that. So to get straight into the queer children's literature, we wanted to give you kind of a map of some of the books that have come out. When I started looking into this, I thought there wasn't going to be very much, and I was actually surprised at what was there. So this is kind of a snapshot of, in the past 2-ish decades, what books have come out and that have become popular books. There have been a lot more books, but these are the ones that you might be able to buy in like a Borders if they still existed. Do you want to?
Yeah, I maybe just quickly touch on one book that I absolutely adore. Oh, and one thing too, before I go into that, is it safe to say that all of these have been on the banned books list?
I'm not super sure about the bottom 3.
Okay.
I know that all of these have been on the banned books list, especially the top 2. These 2 are kind of the books that came out. They were kind of the vanguards of the queer children's literature genre at all. And they came out in the late 80s and early 90s and were heavily contested. There was lots of legal court cases and lots of PTAs that were very, very upset about these books and have been contested to this day. I think the last court case was in the early 2000s in Oregon. So still being fought in schools and in libraries.
And we brought 2 of them. So one is the just the ones we were able to check out in our library, which shows how inclusive our library is, I guess. We found Entangle Makes 3, which is a book about 2 penguins, and it's a true story. I think it's in the New York City Zoo, who ended up, they're both male penguins, and they raised an egg together that the zookeepers gave to them to raise because they noticed they were exhibiting behavior that was typical of a couple in penguins. And this book was on the banned books list from 2006 to 2009. Every single year it was the #1 most challenged book, except for 2008, where it was the 2nd most challenged book. And it's about penguins in a zoo. So, and it's a true story too, which is interesting. And this is another one that I really want to highlight because this is probably my favorite book ever. It's called It's Perfectly Normal, Changing Bodies, Growing Up, Sex and Sexual Health. And it's really for young adolescents sort of as they're approaching puberty and just realizing what it means to be a sexual being and a gendered person, because after all, we're all sexual and gendered persons, whether we're asexual or sexualized. Oh, that's bad term. But there were a couple pages in here, number 20 to 21, I wanted to show you all. And this is just a representation of bodies and what bodies look like. And we think this book does a really phenomenal job of being really inclusive when it comes to bodies. So if you look closely, I'm not sure how well y'all can see this, let's be closer. We've got different body types, so folks who are all different sizes. We've got ability, so you'll notice that there's someone in a wheelchair here, and that's an identity that often is overlooked. And just tons of different racial identities that are visible within the folks, and ages too. You see a child here, then you see more adults. So we think they just did a pretty phenomenal job of making sure to include lots of different identities in the body types page. And this is just one chapter in the book. And then the other one I wanted to highlight was families. And there's a whole chapter on families and babies. And there's just looking at the pictures too. You can read the text at a later date if you want. We'll share the PowerPoint like this instead. But if you look at the different families that are represented, you can see there's a single parent family, there's biracial families, there's, again, different ability identities represented. So we just think that this book is a really great resource to have in young classrooms for children so as they're approaching the age where they're questioning things like this, so that they can look and realize that what they're going through is completely normal. It's perfectly normal, in fact. And they can see themselves represented in the pictures as well as in the text. So.
Yeah, and that's something that comes up often in classrooms is what happens when your family isn't represented in the way that either your teacher or the books that you read talk about what families are supposed to look like. And so we thought this book did a really excellent job of incorporating intersecting identities. So when we're talking about sexuality, we're not just talking about sexuality, we're also talking about how you experience race, how you experience your gender, how you experience feelings of love, how you experience family, age, ability. And what we really liked about that book and what we really hope to see in more books is that when we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about all of ourselves at the same time and not kind of separating out sexuality from the identities that all of us hold and experience in a lot of different ways. So we thought that we gave that book the Intersectionality Award of the ones we
Love that.
And it's great too because a lot of times when you talk about queer identities and queer literature, it's very focused on the student or the person themselves, and people often overlook family structures. So there's lots of representations of queer family structures in that book where there's 2 mothers or 2 dads, and there's even a couple, I believe, where there's multiple parents in like a co-parenting situation. So it gives credit and authority to differing family structures that aren't often represented. In fact, very rarely are represented in the media. So we love that book.
So we're actually going to get to read one of the books. We're going to have story time. And so, but first we wanted to, first we wanted to really talk about when we're going to read this book, of course we're going to enjoy reading the children's book. We're also going to analyze it and kind of pull apart what is there and what is not there. And since you all are here taking a class on multicultural children's literature, that's kind of been your task for the week, is to look at these books and analyze them. So we wanted to ask you first, what are some of the tools or some of the ways that you've been interacting with maybe with the movie or the different maybe articles you've been reading? I don't know if you've been reading articles. You've been assigning homework. And you've all been doing it. Absolutely. So what are some of the tools that you've been using to kind of pull apart the meaning in either movies or articles? If you want to just shout them out or raise your hand.
Just kind of been talking amongst ourselves, not really like doing anything specific, but just discussing the topics and getting all of our thoughts out.
Yeah, so thinking about your reactions to them and then kind of comparing your reactions. Awesome. How have your courageous conversations, has that come into play at all? Sorry, not to put you on the spot. You can be like, no. That's just fine. Well, we're going to offer some more tools for you to consider as you practice kind of pulling apart children's literature. These tools come from a field of study, critical discourse analysis, that I'm just starting to learn about and find really exciting because it's really helped me when I'm reading an article or when I'm watching a movie, if I watch a commercial. These kinds of things help me, they come in the back of my head and I can, they help me construct questions to analyze the world around me. Because sometimes it can be easy to be like, oh, that's just the way it is. And you have to be like, wait a minute, and put on your critical discourse glasses and say, okay, well, why is this the way it is? So these are the tools I'm offering, and you can take them if you'd like. And so words here, you could also replace that with text, like image, or like if you're watching a movie, you could apply this also, but since we're reading a book, we're talking about words. So the first one is that words are power. They help us construct the world around us. They're what we put in laws. They're what we writing letters, words are really, really important in terms of how we construct reality. And so when we're talking about children's books, they're not neutral and they are political because they're a form of constructing reality, which delineates power. And they're also social. Words are social. So they make meaning within a social context. So like I was saying, if we looked at stories from the 1800s, they'd be using different words and there'd be a different social context. So when we read books, we have to kind of keep in mind what was going on in the news at that time, what was going on in that country at that time, and really keep in our frame and in our questions the social and historical context of where that book or where that movie came from. And they're also really messy. Words are messy. So we tell lots of different stories around maybe what's moral or what's immoral, what is successful or what's not successful. All of these kind of narratives and stories that we hold in ourselves are happening at different times or at the same time, and they can be contradicting. So if you ever had that like angel, devil kind of scenario, maybe you have conflicting and messy stories going on in your head. And also words pick favorites. Words are used to kind of reproduce social hierarchies and to tell us what is a good thing or a bad thing, what is who's criminal, who's not criminal, all these things. So words, just like words have power, they also help reproduce power in the same place it's already been. I mean, you saw Tom Horn and John Hubenthal use words to kind of construct a very specific story about what the students are doing in the classroom. But maybe the students themselves were saying, actually, our story is quite different. But because John Hubenthal, they're privileged by their position in society, by their race, by their class, their words have different weight and different power to them. And they're using those words to reproduce that power. And that can be applied to the songs you hear on the radio. This can be applied to children's books. It can be applied to pretty much anything, which is why it's a really neat tool to help you kind of deconstruct the way reality is being constructed all the time. How does everyone feel about, I was quick, I know. This is like you could get a PhD in this stuff. So
yes, you can, actually.
Yes. Yeah, I know. How does that land on you all? Are you like, no, don't want it, I'm really excited?
Interesting to have different perspectives on how to look at things.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just like what the world tells you it is, you can use these tools to figure out why you do things.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can even say like, well, why do I think that? Totally.
I think the first one is interesting. I'm not really sure if I am completely believe in that, but then once I think about it, it sounds right, and then in different scenarios and stuff, but I never really thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
This goes directly into what this just aligns perfectly what we've been doing today. We did the activity of taking glasses and writing our frames of reference. So the different isms or institutions or secondary or primary ways that we're socialized, which again in that cycle of socialization talks about nothing's ever neutral and it's always political. So maybe that's an area we need to explore a little bit more too. It's exciting.
Are there any points that you have questions about or you don't agree with? Well, then let's, if you want to keep these in mind, we're going to read a children's book and use this kind of, I guess you could say glasses. You're going to put on your critical discourse analysis glasses to hear the story that we're going to read. And we're going to read Daddy Has Two Roommates. Nope. Sorry, Daddy's Roommates.
That's a good connection to it. Yeah. He's got two roommates. Dang, Daddy.
So let's talk about, non-monogamous relationships Okay, not there yet.
And what we're actually going to do is we don't have the full text of the book with us, unfortunately. It's checked out right now. So we've got a couple of slides of important passages from it, but it's a really short book, so you should be able to get the story from the pages that we do have.
Yeah.
And just pay attention to some of these tools that we're going to utilize today when you're looking at the pictures, because in children's book there's always the pictures, right? And when you're little, you really like to look at those as you're hearing the words. So pay attention to the pictures and the representations and the activities and also the words that are being written, because you always make a choice, or a writer always makes a choice when they write down the words that they're using. So just keep these in mind as we read through the story.
Yeah. Woohoo! Right. Do you want to read it?
So it's called Daddy's Roommate, as Chelsea said. It's written and illustrated by Michael Wilhoit. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sorry if I'm not. Beginning. My mommy and daddy got a divorce last year. I'll just give you a couple seconds on each page to kind of look at the picture as well. Sorry,
If you want to jot down notes, you're welcome to. If you don't, that's fine. But we're going to be kind of analyzing what's here at the end.
Next page says, now there's somebody new at Daddy's house. Daddy and his roommate Frank live together. Notebook the pictures though. Work together, eat together, and sometimes even fight together. But they always make up. Frank likes me too. Just like Daddy, he tells me jokes and riddles. Makes great peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and chases nightmares away. We go to ball games, go to the beach. Mommy says Daddy and Frank are gay. At first, I didn't know what that meant, so she explained it. Being gay is just one more kind of love, and love is the best kind of happiness. Daddy and his roommate are very happy together, and I'm happy too.
Okay. So, we'd like to do this in small groups. So if you want to take a second just to reflect on that, or write down however you like to process things. But what we'd like to have you talk in maybe groups of 3, if that works. Talk about what was represented in the book, who was there, what were some of the images you saw. So what were some of the social, cultural, and political institutions or identities? What did you see? And then what institutions or identities were not in the book? So we're going to start with those 2 questions. And if you want to take like a couple minutes and talk in groups of 2 or 3, maybe with someone who you haven't, you've kind of been paired up this entire time. And then we're going to take a little bit and just have a conversation about it.
So let's try to do 2 groups of 2 and then 1 group of 3, and then we'll ask each group to share out of each.
Cool.
Yeah, that's good. Just to mix it up a little bit. You turn it off.
I noticed that in the pictures, the kid would be with the 2 dads, whatever, or he wouldn't be, or he'd be watching, it wasn't a big deal, he didn't know what was going on, you have to know, you're supposed to all
No, it's doing very well. We just expected more things. How's everyone doing? Please come back. Sorry, I'm not like staring you down. I'm just loving that you two are like. I love it. It's great.
No, you're just focused.
I know.
My shirt that bright.
Yeah. I just want to know. I want to know what you're saying. I'm excited.
That one people like, oh, I'm like happy, it's okay, but like there's actually like a lot of
Okay, let's bring it back. So let's start with the first one. What did you all think of, what were some of the identities that were represented in Daddy's roommate?
Start with this end of the room.
Do you want us to say like kind of what we talked about?
Yeah, just.
Well, we were talking about how cool it was well, just seeing it through the eyes of a child because like Leia said, it's like unbiased. And it's really like how pure that opinion is because it's not formed by anything yet, and it's nice to actually have something that's like an example even to a child that shows you that it's just that it's love. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I that's
The perspective of the child.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the story is told from the child's perspective, which matters a lot. How about
we thought that it was kind of happy. I mean, they seemed happy together. But you know how they were happy and then they would sometimes fight and then they would always make up. There was just a lot more. They didn't show the complications, like more in depth of like the relationship. They just kind of showed that they're happy together. So,
That's great. So maybe one of the things that is left out is the more complicated part of big.
This group over here, what'd you come up with?
I think we were talking about, or we said unbiased too, just from the kid's perspective, and that just, just made it. He just accepted it, and it was okay, and that's just how it was, and because he didn't know anything, or I guess he did know something else, but like, since he was young, he was able to accept that, and that was.
Why do you think the author chose to write the story from a child's perspective? Since two groups mentioned that, let's stay with that for a minute. Yeah.
I was thinking it would be easy for a child to understand because maybe some kids actually haven't seen like a relationship like that or have lived in their own lives, and I think it would be easy for a child to like kind of be like because like when I read books as a child, especially when it was from a child's perspective, I thought of them as like my friends, you know, and so like I feel like it's just maybe just being able to identify with that storyteller more.
Okay, absolutely. So there's a desire to tell a story in a way that connects the person who's reading it. Absolutely. Yeah.
It could also be because there's so much opposition from like adults and people around. Like, there's so much controversy about relationships like that children just, if they grow up with it, that's just normal for them. And so they don't. It doesn't have the bias of people who have different opinions.
Again, going off of what you were saying, a lot of the opposition has to do with how to discuss issues of sexuality with kids in school, and so like, oh, you have to keep this out of the classroom because it has to do with sexuality and that's inappropriate. And this shows that you can talk about different family structures, or you can talk about it in a way that's appropriate for every age group too.
And those aren't conversations that are off limits to kids because, you know, I mean, you talk about love between a man and a woman even when you have little kids. So, so those, kind of making those conversations accessible. So, any last burning thoughts? Yeah? Okay, we're going to move on to this last question we have here. So we're curious about how does this book work to subvert or reinforce the normalcy of heterosexual gender roles, family structures, or sexuality? So
Maybe to put it in a different way, like what are some things that they were doing or saying, or some things that the pictures were illustrating that would like to reinforce or to depict what would be a traditional or normal heterosexual gender role or a normal, quote unquote, normal family structure? Like, did you notice anything that you would see like, oh, that's pretty normal?
Well, the couples that I know, they act like the way in the book. I mean, they each have their different role. They just choose which one they want to be. I mean, they have the one guy sitting down and the other guy was doing the ironing. And they could both cook or one could cook. They can be either role they want. And that's all they picked. It was really no difference in a man or a woman except for it was a man and a man.
So kind of presenting different roles that happen within a like family structure.
Yeah, it could be two of the same people, and they could be doing totally different roles.
Mm-hmm.
So you can still be a man and do laundry too,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll just be considered the wife.
Okay. So that's really like, I think that to me is like breaks the conversation wide open of the idea of that a wife's role does a certain thing and a husband's role does other things. And, but maybe that's not totally tied to gender, as in this book. What do you all think of that? Do you think that there's different kind of roles for wives and husbands?
Well, I feel like
No? Getting some no's? Getting some yeses?
I feel like the traditional family, like the husband goes to work and then the wife like does the cleaning and cooking and like takes care of the kids and then they all have dinner together.
Mhm.
That comes home. But like in my own house, like my dad cooks dinner sometimes and like he helps with stuff and it's not like it has to be structured just like for like perfect. I don't want to say perfect because
Yeah.
it's not the ideal household sometimes, I guess. But so you don't have to go by the traditional rules that people have set.
Great. So I think Hannah kind of just like laid out for us what some of the like traditional stories are around like, and again we have to, the way we know that, you know, Cinderella does the washing and Prince Charming does the hunting or whatever is because we told these stories for so long that that's how we just imagine. Does everyone like feel like, yeah, I think I've heard the story of like wives cook and husbands work? So, and what you kind of brought out for us is that that's not always the way reality is. And what do you all think? There's some other hands and heads that were moving. I know that you kind of.
Yeah, well, I think it's just sort of evolved. Like maybe that was something that started, you know, however long ago, and then you know, in the 21st century, it's like, wait, like you know, women can go to work and can do just as much as the man can. And I don't know, in my household, like my dad's sort of like the stay-at-home mom. Like he works from home, my mom goes to work. Like they both like share the cooking, and I feel like it's more of an equality thing too.
So, keeping that kind of in mind, how does this story interact with that narrative? What did you see? What were some of the roles that you saw in that particular depiction of family?
Could you scroll back to some of the images?
Yeah, good idea.
Especially the ones where they're doing housework and stuff.
This is an outside. This is probably one of my favorite pictures in the book, just because it's a really rich picture. Like there's a lot going on here, because you see, I mean, to me this is the picture that kind of like is the clearest pointing to the idea of one person does the cleaning and one person goes to work, because he's not just holding up a t-shirt, he's holding up a collared shirt. It's this idea that one person in a couple needs to be going to work, and then one person needs to be kind of aiding that person in working by cleaning. And so wrapped up in that is a lot to do with class. You know, he's not holding up a jumpsuit, and he's not holding up a rock star's outfit, he's holding up just kind of a white collared shirt, so maybe a white collared job. And also, you know, and gender roles as well. So you have class and gender interacting in this one picture. Some more. Yeah. So we're coming to a close. Actually, you all are being super patient and lovely since it's 5 after. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry for taking up your time, or taking over your time. But we just wanted to really encourage you as you continue to look at different children's books throughout this week and throughout maybe your lifetime, to really apply kind of these questions to who is here, who is not here, and how is that constructing a story that either supports current stories and modern, these kind of narratives we hear all the time, or maybe it subverts those stories and challenges them. Yeah. And then also to encourage you to be authors of your own stories and to write narratives that represent your reality too.
So a good example would be, I don't know what the useful here. Is it Anna and Donna? Totally wrong, okay.
Abby.
Abby and Hannah. Abby and Hannah. You were both kind of saying how your family structures don't really fit into this mold. So taking that into account in your personal experience, like how would you rewrite the story? And you don't have to answer that, but maybe just as you all leave today, think about why it was important that this family structure was represented in this way, and how you could re-envision that based on your own personal experiences or experiences of others that you've seen.
And thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks for participating.
Good. Oh my gosh. So I want to thank you both because this really sets the stage for tomorrow, because we're going to talk about critical multicultural analysis and look at different ways that folks have used critical multicultural analysis to address disability issues, different ethnic groups like Native folks, and so you're really setting the framework for us about how to do critical analysis of children's literature. And I love this because this is also from their list of books that, represent gay and lesbian families and communities over time. And so they're not saying that this is a bad book. And I love that, because you're saying this book is complicated because it is, one of the first books that actually represents, families, and families from not the traditional mainstream norm, but it still holds some of those traditional mainstream norm ideologies inside of it, which, complicates it. So again, our job as critical multicultural analysis is not to ban books or to say a book is bad. It's really to help children and each other as adults, and I love that, because children's literature is for all of us, to really investigate it and think critically about the images that we're seeing, and teaching children to look for them themselves. So really great, the two. Thank you so much. Thank you.